Hi there, this is Launches Uncovered, that's what I'm calling this, or reveals of the reveals. We've had all 10 car reveals. I'm with Ted Kravitz and going to get his views on what we have learned from the reveals. Might chip in a few things myself. Sorry that Ted's sponsorship deal fell through, so he's had to cover up the branding there, but I guess if the finance arrives, maybe we'll wait on a call, we'll bring that in at some point. But anyway, we're going to do it in reverse championship order. So Williams first. What did you make of that event, that car?
Quite a bare car. I mean, they could have done with some sponsors,
Yes.
even if they were hidden or there. So they've got some sponsorship, maybe need a little bit more. They've lost some sponsorship with Nicholas Latifi leaving from last year to this year. It wasn't the real car that we saw at the launch, but we did see it later on at the Silverstone Shakedown. It looks tidy. It looks like they can make some progress, but really that's not Williams' issue this year. Williams' issue this year is getting their new team boss, James Vowles, the ex-Mercedes strategist, fully in harness, fully getting to know what the team needs, and then moving forward from there, and getting their new rookie Logan Sargent up to speed.
Yeah, so no team boss at the launch. James Vowles wasn't there. And I asked actually, are you waiting on decisions for him so that you can get on with some work at the factory? And one or two of the engineers said, yes, we are. And they also said, when I asked them, well, didn't you give over most of last year to developing this year's car? Why are you a bit downbeat about this year's car? Well, we didn't like that change in the rule about the ride because they'd already begun working on a car with a lower ride height level. So that was them. I think they're thinking it's going to be a tricky start to the year, but let's see how they get on from there. Okay, second last in the standings last year, AlphaTauri. The only launch I didn't go to in New York, sort of fashionista type thing. What about them this year? Interesting how that team, I suppose, evolves over the next seasons.
I mean, it's a mark of how surprising it is to see AlphaTauri, the junior Red Bull team, down in 9th in the Constructors, and it's really raised our eyebrows. It must be raising their eyebrows. The car was launched as part of New York Fashion Week. That's because AlphaTauri, believe it or not, as well as Italian for, well, it's a kind of star system, isn't it? It's like Red Bull,
Alpha Centauri,
or something like that. So yeah, it's to do with it's a clothing brand, AlphaTauri, owned by Red Bull. And they're gonna need more than a few, nicking the bits of what car improvements are in fashion with everybody else to get them further up the grid. They've got Nick De Vries, a guy coming in. He's nearly a rookie. He's done one Grand Prix. And Yuki Tsunoda, the Japanese driver, needs to start leading that team and pushing it forward up the grid.
Yeah. Where are they going to go engine-wise? We've got this Ford's alliance with Red Bull, who've got the powertrains factory. Could AlphaTauri go a different path? Could they be a team that, say, someone looking to come into F1, and we know there's more than Andretti doing it, could maybe buy? Are they for sale, potentially?
I think there are about 4 teams that are potentially for sale if the price is right. I think McLaren say they're not for sale, but anything at a price, it would be quite high. Williams, Haas and AlphaTauri, they're the 4 teams that are potentially for sale if the price is high enough. The other teams tend to be manufacturer bound, or the likes of Aston Martin tied to a consortium that runs a manufacturer. So anything's possible, but no, I think it's likely that AlphaTauri would continue with the Red Bull Ford into 2026.
Okay. I was at Haas, not for the launch, but I did go to the factory. Funny you bring up teams being bought. That team was bought for £1, I think, wasn't it? It was liquidated, in effect, when it was Marussia, at least that factory unit and everything else, and given over to Haas. Wonder what it would cost you to buy Haas right now.
$900 million.
Wow.
You will not get a Formula One team now with the value that the franchise is for anything less than $850 or $900 million. And Gene Haas, I asked him when Audi was sniffing around at the beginning or the middle of last year, I asked Haas, I said, look, is the team for sale? They said, well, no, not really, but if somebody were to offer just short of $1 billion, then anything's for sale.
What did Williams go for? 178 or something, which is astonishing, just a couple of years ago. All right, that car, is it all about whether the Ferrari engine has this fabled extra 30 horsepower?
The Haas looks solid. I think all they're going for is the double point scorers with both cars. It's too often that Mick Schumacher was having accidents, wasn't able to score at the same level as Kevin Magnussen. But now they've got Nico Hülkenberg, who is a point-scoring machine, Craig. He is a machine. and he can actually get up there and score significant points. I'm thinking 2 or 3 per weekend, which at the end
maybe
of
a podium.
Maybe it hasn't had one yet. At the end of 23 races, should see Haas at least stay where they are and maybe even move into 7th or 6th.
Okay. Hulkenberg's old team, the Silverstone team, Aston Martin, are they potentially the biggest movers in the Constructors' Championship this year? If so, why?
I think so. Very good launch, hosted by our colleague, of course, Rachel Brooks. Very nicely done. No frills, just getting the drivers on, hearing from Dan Fallows, the new technical director, and that is why, Craig. Dan Fallows is their secret weapon. He's come from Red Bull. He knows all the secrets from Red Bull. Was part of a Red Bull tug of love, wasn't he? Actually, in terms of leaving the team. They didn't want to let him leave, and they actually had to go legal for a moment in order to allow him to leave.
Prodromou and Fallows, wasn't it, that McLaren tried to get years ago?
Yeah,
they got Prodromou, but they held on to Fallows.
Held on to Fallows, and now Fallows wanted to leave to set up his own way of doing things at Aston Martin, which is precisely what it looks like he's done. He's ambitious. He has ambitions for the car to make it into at least the top 4 and maybe even higher. And there is a real positive feeling around Aston Martin at the moment. It's a Mercedes engine. You can talk about whether the Ferrari engine with Alfa Romeo Sauber is more powerful or not, but Aston Martin are going to be big movers. They do not expect to stay 7th in the Constructors this year.
As someone said, maybe Alonso has finally made a move that is a good one in terms of career transfers. Right, Alfa Romeo, we're calling them right now. That was a really interesting launch. On the face of it, we're still Alfa Romeo. Alessandro Aluni-Bravi, team representative of this rather strange title. They had the CEO of Alfa Romeo there, and yet, in effect nothing. Now, it's Audi, right? Andreas Seidel there saying nothing, but Andreas Seidel very much pulling the strings at that factory. Is it going to be a time of limbo, or is it going to be a few years of progress before they are officially Audi? Or might they be Audi even next year, potentially, after this Alfa Romeo sponsorship ends?
Perhaps, although I think Audi, with their history in motorsport, want to come in a position to win, and they are not yet in a position to win, and won't be until 2026, when Audi is going to come in as per the new entrant. So I don't think they will go early. I think with Andreas Seidel, moved from McLaren, they have a very good operator who's going to get everything in the right area. But there's nothing to say that a team based in Switzerland, away from the centres of motorsport knowledge of excellence of Italy, where AlphaTauri and Ferrari are, and the UK Motorsport Valley, where everybody else is, there's nothing to say that really that's still the best place for Audi to be, in the middle of Switzerland, in this really sort of pocket of out on an island by themselves.
You've been there. I went there for the first time. It's a small site on an industrial estate next to an abattoir or some sort of meat processing place. It's got a nuclear bunker underneath, because that's Swiss law, apparently, yeah. But okay, so that's them.
So we'll see what they do. But Valtteri Bottas, I'm expecting some good things from him. Zhou Guanyu as well, and Bottas at the launch, proudly showing off his new moustache and mullet.
Yeah. Okay. Right, McLaren. After years in the ascendant, and then a slightly flatlining year last year, Oscar Piastri in. I was at the launch. It was the car, so the car is ready. Andrea Stella, as a team principal, the first question I want to ask him was, did you always want to be a team principal? Did you have ambitions? Because he's relatively advanced in years to be getting that job. And I wasn't sure, is he a natural in that particular role? And it was an interesting answer he gave. He said, throughout my career, I haven't really plotted the path. Jobs have found me rather than the other way around. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to be a success. He's a charming man, but what do you reckon? Does Seidel leave a hole there? Inevitably.
I think so, but Andrea Stella is one of the new engineers made good into team principals in the way of James Vowles. So we're seeing a change in the kind of old style team principalness or ship that we used to have. Ron Dennis, Eddie Jordan, Jean Todt, Stefano Domenicali. Those guys have gone.
Well, except that Binotto's been tried. They've tried that at Ferrari, haven't they? The engineer as team boss, and it didn't really work.
Well, that's not a great portent for Stella and Vals, then, is it? No, but I think when you've got people on above them, which Andrea Stella has, he has Zach Brown to effectively be the captain of the entire aircraft carrier, and that particular part of the aircraft carrier on deck 3 is McLaren Racing Formula One. They've also got a Formula E team, they've got a rallycross team, haven't they? They've got and so they've got lots of other concerns. Where Stella needs to be is the quiet but deadly team principal in the mould of Jean Todt. He needs to be that guy who moves slowly but carries a firm stick, I think, as the way speaks slowly but carries a
the way you commanded the room there.
Sorry. So if he is that, and he commands respect from everybody, and they don't just see him as Andrea from engineering is now the team principal, then I predict he'll do very well.
Okay. The team that beat them narrowly was Alpine. I was thinking of simulating the star name at their launch. Give you a clue. Probably shouldn't do that, but Zinedine Zidane, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
It signals their ambition. A lot of style at that launch, very glitzy. What about the substance behind it? I mean, again, complex management structure. Otmar Safner, team boss there. A big gap to the third, place team last year. 462 points, I think it was. Can they be? All right, this is the stated aim. We'll be closer to third than we will be to fifth, and we'll keep fourth. Can they do that?
Modest ambitions.
Well,
I mean, I felt
you look at the points, it isn't.
No, I felt it was a modest ambition for them just to say we need to keep fourth, and if possible, get a bit closer to third. That's a bit too modest, isn't it? I mean, I know they were really splashing it out. They have Zinedine Zidane as a team representative. They have double Olympic gold medalist boxer Nicola Adams running their young driver program and being a great person to enthuse and get everybody going on the young driver program. And then they say, well, we hope we'll stay fourth, and if possible, we'll get a bit closer to third. What about saying we want to get third? What about saying we want to get second? What about saying we want to knock Mercedes off their perch? I felt it was unnecessarily downbeat.
Okay, what about the car, though? Again, they were a team that didn't have porpoising or died it out early, and then have had to live with this raising of the ride height.
Car looks good, and crucially, they said not only are we at the weight limit, we're under the weight limit. So that's not something I've heard from every other team, not least one that we'll get onto next, where they've had to maybe do everything they can to get even near the weight limit. So that's one thing that Alpine have got right. They are lightweight.
Okay. So Mercedes, the big question, finished the year better than they started it last year. But was it a surprise that it was less heavily revised as a concept than it turned out to be this year, that they've looked to evolve rather than revolve? You know what I mean? Have a kind of design revolution on that car. The less floor areas slightly, it looked to me. So what do you reckon? Have they run out of ideas, or have they made the right call in thinking they can sort this car out?
They're giving their big idea that was a failure last year one more go. But I believe they have a plan B in production. And if they need to, they can go to a plan B, which is the Red Bull or Ferrari style of doing things in the middle of the season. So that's why we're hearing from Mercedes.
Too late for a championship.
Oh, definitely, yeah. But we've got these rules are what they are for another few years yet, so they've got to get it right at some point. But at the moment, they're saying, look, we think we've got a proper handle on what went wrong last year. We still believe that our way, unique in the pit lane, of having very slim side pods is the way to go aerodynamically. And anyway, they say most of the downforce is generated by the floor, which you can't see. But they're saying don't expect anything too soon. But I think if they went away without 3 or 4 wins in a season, they'd be disappointed.
I mean, for those that want...
You're more pessimistic.
Lewis to, well, we have no idea, do we? But I mean, they certainly weren't sounding as though they were convinced about the rightness of it was more, we think we can. Eventually, that word eventually always surprises me when I hear it come out the mouth of an engineer, because surely they deal in facts, or they deal in concepts which they know. if they can fix it eventually, why can't they fix it now?
Well, my reading of that was that we've got more things coming online. We've got developments of the European season, and if we think they're going to work, but maybe the bigger question
very long
is,
eventually.
Yeah, the bigger question is why aren't they on the car now if they know what they are or have some idea?
Okay, right. Ferrari then, great launch. I think launch of the year. Brave to have the car. I was sitting in the press room watching the launch on a monitor, and I saw the little segment where they drove the car out. Charles Leclerc won a coin toss, didn't he, to drive it first. And I turned to the head of comms, Sylvia Frangipan-Hoffa, and said, "Did you record this bit?" And she said, "No, listen, you can hear it. It was live." Brave stuff. Again, is it all about how much extra horsepower they have? If they're going to start the season on terms with or ahead of Red Bull?
It's funny because other people have taken what Ferrari have done and then put a spin on it and made it a little bit better, faster themselves. Ferrari have just taken what they've done and tidied it up and tweaked it here and there. And I think you're right. I think they are relying on their perfection of the power unit from last year and pinning their hopes on that. Now that's fine as long as their testing work throughout the winter on the dyno actually proves that they've got on top of that. But if they haven't got the car or anything particularly outrageous or adventurous to rely on back there. So I don't know. I've got high hopes for Ferrari. I think they can be up there and sustaining a championship challenge for Red Bull all season long. I'd like to think it's going to be very tight. It's going to go down to the last race between what eventually will be Charles Leclerc potentially and Max Verstappen. I don't think it will, but something interesting I think is that we do have the new boss Fred Vasseur. I'm sensing a little
bit. The new
bit.
Jean Todt, is he?
I think he is in the Jean Todt mould, because he's not coming out with any pronouncements, any kind of media lines that you can really grab hold of. But one thing he did say about whether they have a number one driver or not, he said Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, they have equal equipment, they will have equal chance to go for the championship, until which time I decide, said Vasseur, that it's in Ferrari's best interest to favour one person for the championship, and then I will make that call. And I thought that was more than Mattia Binotto's ever said about focusing on one driver for the championship.
I thought he was much more convincing as a team boss than I've seen anyone at Ferrari for some time, maybe since Stefano's time, maybe even since Jean Todt himself. He looked very self-assured. All right, Red Bull finally, New York launch, there wasn't the car, reduced wind tunnel time and all of that, but are they still so far ahead with maybe actually one or two people who said to me, engineers from rival teams, they still think Red Bull will make gains as well, aerodynamically. So is it going to be a difficult job to catch them?
Red Bull will start with the lightweight chassis that they introduced and designed and made, we think, but never raced towards the end of the year. They'll start that as a base. They will have developed that, so it will be underweight, and they can ballast it up to meet the weight limit. Benefit one. Benefit two, they would have done all the aerodynamic work and design before the restrictions they had on their accepted breach agreement of the cost cap restrictions came in, their penalty for that. So they've done all the work before that even comes in. And
so
three,
next year
towards the end of this year, and next year it will start to bite. And number three, they have the best driver on the grid in terms of form at the moment, even considering Lewis Hamilton. Lewis's form we haven't seen the championship form of Lewis yet because he hasn't been in a championship since the end of 2021, which we know what happened then. Max Verstappen is bang in form, and I think that is the third part of their secret weapon that should make them nigh on unbeatable.
We're doing all of this far too early, of course. These are just reflections on launches and where the teams are at based on where they finished last year and what's happened since. But yeah, it's very interesting. It would be good to think, I think there's good evidence to think Ferrari could have closed the gap on Red Bull, given that extra horsepower maybe. Big question mark is about Mercedes. Is it maybe a little bit of a bluff because their fingers were burned last year when they were bullish at the launch, and maybe that has affected the way they have couched their ambitions for this car.
There's only one way to find out.
Watch it on Sky Sports F1. Enjoy the ride.
Starting with testing, 23rd to 25th of February, and then the Bahrain Grand Prix from the 3rd to the 5th of March.
Don't miss it.